This week on Vaticano, learn all about the Annunciation from the Church of Santa Maria sopra Minerva in Rome with Father Giertek, theologian of the papal household, and witness firsthand the very place where Mary received the good news, inside the Basilica of the Annunciation in Nazareth. Then travel to Florence to see up close one of the most important paintings of the Annunciation, depicted by Fra Angelico. For this and more, Vaticano starts now. Spring in Rome begins with a very ancient celebration. It's March the 25th, 9 months before Christmas, and the Church celebrates the Solemnity of the Annunciation, the day when the angel Gabriel enters Mary's life and announces that she will become the mother of Jesus. A quiet, domestic moment, yet filled with meaning. We're in the Basilica of Santa Maria sopra Minerva, where Brother Alessandro Monti tells us about the origins of this observance.
In ancient times, the Annunciation Day marked the beginning of the new year, and that's also a quite interesting story. That's because, according to a monk that lived in the Middle Ages, Dionysius Exiguus, the very day in which our Lord Jesus died on the cross was the 25th of March. So they thought that in order for life to be complete, one had to die in the same day in which he was conceived. So that is the reason for which they thought that March the 25th was the ideal day to commemorate also the beginning of the earthly life of Jesus. And at the same time, it is also very close to the spring equinox. So it is also very fitting as a date to commemorate the beginning of the new creation. Just like Adam, according to tradition, was created on the 25th of March, so Jesus also came into the world on the 25th of March.
The Annunciation, then, is not only the beginning of the story of Jesus, it's the moment when the way of thinking about the relationship between God and man changes. In the Old Testament, God had spoken to the patriarchs, the prophets, and the wise men, Abraham, Moses, Samuel, and others. With the Annunciation, he turns to a young woman. Mary's fiat echoes the "Here I am" of the most important figures of the Old Testament. It's not just an announcement, it's the beginning of a choice. Mary doesn't accept immediately. First, she asks a question.
When Mary, in her prayer,
Father Giertek, theologian of the pontifical household, explains how this question underscores a fundamental principle about the relationship between faith and reason.
it's interesting to see that Mary asked the question, how is it possible? Which means that the reception of the divine promptings is not blind. It's not just close your eyes. No, the question is justified. But when the answer is through the power of the Holy Spirit, well, then the mind makes an act of faith in the mystery and accepts the divine response. So we are not to be blind in our faith in the sense that we don't think. We are entitled to think, both within faith and outside of faith. But faith is the humility of the mind, which accepts the mystery. And God leads us in a strange way through the zigzags of our life. And so reflection on the Annunciation from the point of view of Mary is a teaching for us.
It is here that, according to the Christian faith, something unique takes place, the moment when the Word became flesh. And it is precisely at the instant of the Annunciation, even before the birth in Bethlehem and the resurrection, that the Christian tradition places the definitive union between the divine and human nature in Jesus Christ.
It's absolutely fundamental because, of course, God decreed from the very eternity that humankind would be saved through the Incarnation. So that is a divine decree. And since it is a divine decree, it takes place because God wants it. However, in this decree, it is also included the fact that mankind has to freely assent to give the consent, so to speak, to God's plan for our salvation. St. Augustine has a very nice line, and he says, "The one who created you without you will not save you without you," meaning that grace and freedom shall cooperate with each other.
Over the centuries, countless artists have sought to capture the uniqueness of the Annunciation. In the Cappella dell'Annunziata, there's a very distinctive version painted for the Jubilee year of 1500 by the artist Antoniazzo Romano.
If you pay close attention to it, you will see that there is something strange, even weird perhaps, and that is the presence of other figures that were not intended to be part of the original story, because you see that the Blessed Virgin Mary is sort of bowing and handing something to those little girls that are in the forefront. And there is also another man who's wearing a Dominican habit. He is also a cardinal because he has a red hat. So that cardinal was Ioannis de Torre Cremata, that was his Latin name, and he was an important man of his time, and in 1460 he decided to create a confraternity that was dedicated to Our Lady of the Annunciation. However, they also wanted to represent their own activity, because the Blessed Virgin Mary is actually handing them a little bag with some money inside. That was because the main purpose of the fraternity was to give dowries to poor women who couldn't have a dowry by themselves, so they needed financial support in order to marry or to become nuns.
March the 25th is not only the liturgical solemnity of the Annunciation celebrated by Catholics around the world, but it's also the International Day of the Unborn Child, a reflection on the value of life that commemorates precisely this moment, the incarnation of Jesus in Mary's womb. In a few moments, we'll be back to see up close the Basilica of the Annunciation, the place where Mary said yes. It's always the same routine. Every Sunday at 12 p.m., the Pope steps to the window of his apartment and greets the faithful.
Cari fratelli e sorelle, buona domenica!
The Angelus prayer, which the Pope recites every Sunday together with all Catholics worldwide, is over 2,000 years old. This prayer is a devout retelling of an event that many consider to be the most significant event in world history.
Angelus Domini nunciavit Mariae.
Et concepit de Spiritu Sancto.
Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum.
Mary's famous yes to God's plan to make the Word flesh is not only the turning point in the history of salvation, but also one of the foundations upon which the Church is built. In October of the Jubilee year 2025, Pope Leo highlighted this during the Jubilee dedicated to Marian spirituality.
Fratelli e sorelle, la spiritualità mariana.
Brothers and sisters, Marian spirituality is at the service of the gospel. It reveals its simplicity. Our affection for Mary of Nazareth leads us to join her in becoming disciples of Jesus. Jesus invites us to be part of his kingdom, just as he asked Mary for her yes, which, once given, was renewed every day.
E poi rinnovato di giorno in giorno.
The place where Mary first said yes to God's plan can still be visited today. Nazareth, once a small village in Israel, became the starting point of God's incarnation. Today, The Basilica of the Annunciation stands exactly where the angel once appeared to Mary.
Now we're here actually inside the Grotto of the Annunciation. And so this is amazing because this is where we know the story of the Bible. The angel Gabriel appeared. So the angel Gabriel spoke and history waited. God did not interrupt humanity with cracks of thunder. He asked for consent. And the Incarnation didn't begin with some miraculous miracle or miracle of power. It began with a young lady's yes. It is the most important event in human history.
Where Mary received the angel's message 2,000 years ago, there's now an altar. On it is an inscription in Latin, Verbum caro hic factum est. Here, the word became flesh.
When you come here, you want to know, many people want to know, is this the spot? Yes. Do I know this is the spot? Absolutely. Why do we say the angel appeared in this cave? Keep it in mind. Back in the first century, when people used to build houses, they would build their house on top of caves or in front of caves. And the caves had multi-purposes for storage, food, oil. But in Jewish families, these grottos were the isolation rooms for women.
The Gospel of Luke says Mary was much perplexed when the angel appeared in the room.
If we go back to the Old Testament, hospitality of Abraham, the angels walked in. They didn't fly in. They looked like men. And to confirm that even Sarah was sneaking because women are not supposed to be in the presence of strange men. So why Our Lady panicked when she saw somebody greeting her? Because he happened to appear in a very private place. Not only in their house, because the house is on top of it, and you can see the staircase coming down here. Put yourself in her shoes and understand.
And this would have been the original staircase in first century. That's incredible.
A visual staircase that was restored. She was home, decided to come to the storage room. And all by a sudden, coming down that staircase, she hears somebody saying, "Hail Mary." Would you panic? Yes. You would panic because you don't expect to see somebody.
Yet Mary showed great trust in God's plan and gave her consent. After she had said yes, the angel left her, as the evangelist Luke writes. And here in Mary's house in Nazareth, pilgrims can still today reflect on the great mystery that the Church commemorates every year on March the 25th, the Solemnity of the Annunciation.
It's the goosebump of coming over here and feeling her presence, okay? Because the whole Bible and salvation history stands on Genesis 3, salvation for all women. She's ordering her son to change waters into excellent wine. That woman is Mary. And then Revelation 12, she's taking the child away from the beast. Mary, Mary, Mary. That's why the song, Father, you know the song, Mary, did you know? Oh, she knew because she treasured things in her heart. Mary did.
Mary's simple yes not only changed the course of history, but has also inspired people for centuries. The scene, witnessed 2,000 years ago, only by Mary of Nazareth and the angel himself, has also found its way into art, as in this famous 15th century painting by Fra Angelico. And the dialogue between the Blessed Virgin Mary and the angel is still recited every day by Catholics in the famous Angelus prayer, just as Pope Leo does every Sunday at noon in Rome.
Ecce ancilla Domini.
Fiat mi secundum verbum tuum.
Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris sui, Iesus.
Santa Maria Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostre. Amen.
A simple yes changed the course of history. God entrusted the life of His Son under the protection of Mary. We too are called to be her children, and we can do so in many different ways. For over 3 million Catholics, it means being a knight of the militia of the Immaculata.
You do it not for your own personal sanctification, but to put your relationship with Mary at the service of the world.
Father James McCurry is a Franciscan friar and Knight of the Militia of the Immaculata. EWTN Vatican correspondent Sofia Chubak joined him at the Casa Kolbe in Rome, the former Franciscan college that formed St. Maximilian Kolbe as a young seminarian. St. Maximilian later founded the movement of the Militia of the Immaculata.
There is one saint that is particularly close to your hearts. Who is the saint and what does he mean to you?
I kind of made a bargain with Maximilian Kolbe while I was teaching a rather wild bunch of students in an all-boys inner-city high school. I made a bargain with him. I put his painting over my chalkboard, knelt down one night at the start of the school year and says, here's the deal. I'll work for your canonization if you keep an eye on all the juvenile delinquents and the young hooligans out in the classroom, that they learn something from me and that they don't get disruptive. Well, miraculously, he kept his part of the bargain beautifully. It was a wonderful group of students I taught. I'll always remember them. But at that time, I didn't realize that my part of the bargain would take 11 years to complete. So up until 1982, I worked through our order, through my province, to continue promoting his cause for sainthood. And in 1982, the announcement was made.
You had contact, quite good contact, with some of the prisoners that were in Auschwitz with St. Maximilian Kolbe at the time when he was there. Please tell me about the interactions, the conversations that you've had with them, especially Franciszek, who was the man that Maximilian Kolbe swapped places with, and he essentially gave up his life for the freedom of Franciszek.
Yes, as you know, at Auschwitz, one of the prisoners from their barracks had escaped. There were about 600 prisoners in any one given barracks at Auschwitz, and one escaped, and in retaliation, the authorities of Auschwitz stood all 600 all one Sunday in the sun, and they were going to choose 10 to die of starvation in a subterranean bunker at Auschwitz, deprived of food and water, stripped naked. And at random they chose 10. One of the men chosen was Franciszek Gajowniczek, and he cried out, "What will happen to my wife and my family?" Maximilian was so deeply moved by this plea of a family man that he then stepped forward and offered the commandant, Fritsch, that he would like to substitute himself for that man.
This is the place where St. Maximilian Kolbe founded the militia of the Immaculata. And you are a knight of the militia. Could you tell me what role being in this militia has played in your life?
Well, Maximilian was a seminarian here on these premises for 7 years, and in the course of that time, his heart was won over to our Franciscan tradition of consecrating, giving oneself to Our Lady under the title of the Immaculate Conception, abbreviated under the title of the Immaculata. So I joined the militia in 1971, which was the year of the beatification of St. Maximilian Kolbe. I joined before the beatification took place, so I feel that my whole life as a knight has been colored by the Church raising Maximilian to the altars, first as a blessed, his beatification, second as a saint, his canonization.
And as a knight of the militia of the Immaculata, if you could give one order to the young people of today's society, what would it be?
That's a very profound question. Who am I to order anyone? But if I were to give one order, I would say, give yourself to Our Lady, the Mother of Jesus, and let her use you to make something beautiful for God.
Coming up next, Fra Angelico's Annunciation, one of the Renaissance's most luminous masterpieces. Tuscany is home to many great Renaissance painters. In the early 1400s, at the convent of San Marco in Florence, a Dominican friar painted one of history's most famous frescoes on the cloister walls, Fra Angelico's Annunciation.
I think he felt a sort of calling within the calling. He had an extraordinary natural ability for painting, and when he was also called to religious life, his superiors understood that his ability could be put at the service of the gospel. The specific way in which Fra Angelico preached was through his paintings. So you can think of his paintings as sort of homilies in figures and colors.
The Tuscan painter created several depictions of the Annunciation, including the famous one now displayed at the Prado Museum in Madrid. Fra Angelico decorated 44 cells of the cloister with biblical scenes, but upon crossing the threshold into the dormitories, the moment of Mary's yes captures the gaze of every visitor.
Fra Angelico had a very powerful way of describing the role of Mary in the work of salvation with subtle symbols. For example, you see that the garden at the forefront is very colorful and ordered. But if you look behind the wall, Fra Angelico depicted a forest which is really thick and full of disorder. So there is a sort of separation between the word of grace, of union with God, and Mary, of course, is the clear example of that, and the word of sin that lies behind this garden.
Commissioned by Cosimo de' Medici and built in medieval Florence, the convent of San Marco housed Dominican friars for centuries. In 1869, it was restored and transformed into a museum, a library, and a cloistered area for the friars.
The leader of Florence, Cosimo il Vecchio, Cosimo the Older, wanted to build a brand new convent and brand new priory for the friars. And he wanted to have the best artists to decorate it. And there are essentially two kinds of scenes that are depicted within this priory. One of them is scenes from the New Testament, and the other one is a special series on the crucifixion. And the two have two different purposes. So the scenes on the crucifixion are depicted specifically for novices. So when a novice, meaning a friar who has just begun to be a religious, entered into those rooms in which he spent most of his day, he had to meditate on the Passion of Christ.
Fra Angelico arrived in Rome in 1447 to work for Pope Nicholas V in the Niccoline Chapel, living at the convent of Santa Maria sopra Minerva. EWTN gained exclusive access to the cloister, walking the very halls once frequented by Fra Angelico himself.
Fra Angelico lived here in his very final years between 1453 and 1455. And that was a major period in his life because he was commissioned with several paintings, including the frescoes of this cloister, not the ones we are admiring today, but the older version of it. He also spent his final days here, and he was buried here in Santa Maria sopra Minerva. And if you look at this very short record of his activities, you understand he was both a religious and a painter until the very end of his life.
Fra Angelico's works have been celebrated as images of devotion that not only depict sacred scenes, but also invite contemplation and prayer, an artistry that earned him the title of Blessed. On October the 3rd, 1982, Pope John Paul II approved his veneration. and on February the 18th, 1984, he was declared the universal patron of artists.
According to the witnesses, for example, Vasari, one of his great biographers, tells us that he never started a painting without praying first. So each painting is a prayer in itself. And that was also recognized by St. John Paul II. And he said, in the work of Fra Angelico, art becomes prayer. Also, Michelangelo noticed some of his figures, and he said, those figures were first seen by Fra Angelico in heaven, and then he put them on earth. And one of the mottos of Fra Angelico was, chi fa cose di Cristo, con Cristo deve stare sempre. Those who make the work of Christ shall always be with Christ.